Okay, today we're going to start our discussion on the principles of the Constitution, the main ideas behind this governing document. This will be a three-part discussion, and we'll do part one today with separation of powers. We're going to start with this topic, and I want to break down the players in this category. So first off, we've got the legislative branch. That consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and their job is to make laws for our nation. Second branch in our government is the executive branch. This includes the president as well as all executive agencies, things like the State Department, the Department of Defense, IRS, Homeland Security. And everything in the executive branch, everyone from the president on down in the executive branch, their job is to enforce the laws of our country. And finally, you have the judicial branch, the third of our separate powerful entities at the national level. And this consists of the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and the district courts. And their job is to interpret the laws to see if they are in line with the Constitution. Is everything that is being passed by the executive and enforced by the executive and the legislative branch, are all those things constitutional? Now, important thing to note with the Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court is the only court that our Constitution actually spelled out. Congress sets up the Court of Appeals and the district courts. That'll be important when we get to checks and balances in just a minute. Now, some background on separation of powers. To the Founding Fathers, and to Madison especially, they had a fear of tyranny. They feared concentration of power in one set of hands. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to divide out the power. They wanted three separate branches, and they wanted to make sure that no entity could gain control over all three branches at the same time and have tyrannical rule. They had read Montesquieu, and we talked a little bit about Montesquieu's influences last week. So this is something very important to build upon Montesquieu's ideas of how you control government. And, we talked about the Founding Fathers being influenced by their colonial experiences. Well, the colonial experience at this time was of all these powerful legislative branches, and that they knew that there was a need for a strong executive to stand up to the legislative and to represent a different group of people. So, the danger, though, is, of course, that one branch could dominate. So how do you address that? You address it with the second principle of the Constitution, and that is checks and balances. And what you see here is that power is going back and forth. So the president can check Congress. Congress can check the judicial branch. The judicial branch can check the president, and then back and forth. So when the president does something to Congress, Congress can come right back and put a check on the president's power. So it limits each branch throughout this whole setup. What I'd like you to do is to kind of explore, either in your textbook, in current events, or from your own knowledge of history, I want you to explore some examples of checks and balances. What are some of the ways that the president checks Congress, or that Congress checks the president? What are some of the ways that Congress checks the judicial branch, and the judicial branch checks Congress? What are some of the ways the judicial branch checks the president, and how does the president check the judicial branch? So that's what I'm going to be looking for tomorrow when we have our discussion in class. What are some of the ways that checks and balances, what are some of the examples? Now, I'm going to give you some reasons behind the checks and balances in a little bit broader discussion. First thing that you need to understand, like I said before in the previous slide, this was all about protecting our people against tyranny, making sure that one government was not in control of everything, that no branch is dominant. And the way that the powers are set up by the founders is no one branch is dependent on the other for existence. So they are all largely independent with these checks built in. Another thing that happens is that there have been staggered terms. I'm going to focus right here on Congress. So Congress is set up with the House of Representatives. All 435 members are elected every 2 years. And then there's the Senate, where every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up for re-election. So you have these staggering of terms contrasted with the president, who's got a 4-year term. So what happens there is that people can elect a whole new Congress right in the middle of a president's term. They call that the midterm election. And that serves as a popular check on the president's power. So that's a little brief overview of checks and balances. We'll talk a little bit about more in class, and you'll come in with some examples of checks and balances.